Okay, we are still going to do the 3 o'clock program on Latin America update. But for those of you that have already seen the news, it's pretty good news, I guess, if you're a fan of actual talent getting jobs. Because now that Michelle Wolf is canceled, the break is canceled from Netflix. It's possible that some good comedians will actually get some work on Netflix, which, by the way, has missed tremendously on a number of shows. There are shows, by the way, that I think have done very well, but I've heard are not very particularly good, such as 13 Reasons Why, which I believe most people I know that have watched the show say it kind of encourages suicide. I'm not really going to weigh in on that one because it doesn't sound like a show I'm interested in watching anyway. So you can make that judgment call yourself if you're a fan of that show or not. I did watch one episode of The Break and then a couple segments that ended up making the news. And that had to be one of the worst shows I've ever seen. Not just because of the values of the show are things that I disagree with, but there are certain comedians whose values I think are not really what I believe in, such as, for example, Louis Black, who is a pretty good comedian, by the way, such as Bill Maher has some funny bits. You have Dave Chappelle, I often disagree with. There's a lot of comedians out there that I mean, Jim Jeffries, who, before he turned into complete and total fake now, he had some of the best comedy that there was. He'd get on stage. It was just vulgar crap all the time. It was amazing stuff. But he did it well. It's not, by the way, it's not enough to be a vulgar piece of crap on stage, because there's plenty of people that can do that. Now, Michelle Wolf, for those of you that don't remember, she essentially got the show because in the spring, I believe it was in either May or April, she did the White House Correspondents' Dinner. And people were aghast at her performance. I think even members of the liberal media present thought that it was just in poor taste or whatever, which I guess maybe that was the intent. Maybe the whole intent was to do a show that was so provocative and edgy that she would etch her face onto the show forever and ever. But if that was the intention, it sort of backfired. Because the people who did like the show were the type of people who were okay with being, first of all, they were not okay as a general course with insulting women and attacking people who have, for example, a weight problem or whatever, or a weird physical appearance. And what Michelle Wolf did was she pretty much bullied Sarah Sanders in front of her by their standards. Not by my standards, I think Sarah Sanders is a strong enough person to take it. So I'm not saying that it's really that big of an issue for me. But it sort of split the people who are kind of the judgmental people, the people that will say, well, you can't say that joke on stage. It's offensive. It's against women. It's against minorities or whatever. Suddenly these people were fighting each other over whether Michelle Wolf's routine was acceptable. And then, of course, on the conservative side, there are a lot of people who themselves are saying, well, she's insulting a strong Christian woman. Okay, well, look, it's comedy. Comedy is not meant to pussyfoot around people's sensibilities, if it had indeed been comedy. But I think if you watch the White House Correspondents' Dinner, it just looks like a complete and total train wreck. She has just this shrill voice. The delivery is just clumsy, very bad timing. I think anybody, look, I'm not a professional comedian of any type. I work in an industry that's a 9-to-5 industry. I respect the people that can go on stage, even if they bomb. This was the case of somebody who clearly did not deserve the podium of going up to the White House Correspondents' Dinner. There are a lot of people out there, a lot of very hardworking comedians, including ones that were on her show, like Hannibal Buress, that could have gone on the show, on the White House Correspondents' Dinner, and made a funny act out of attacking the Trump administration. They could have. I'm just saying it as somebody who can make a distinction between good comedy and bad comedy. Okay, because yes, this is a question of taste. I think the majority of people's taste determined that Michelle Wolf was just a complete and total disaster at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. And in fact, there was talk at the time that they would no longer invite comedians because it was so bad that the head of the Correspondents Association was getting complaints from reporters who are normally so anti-Trump that they realized, if this is the type of person who seems to be the entertainment that we like, then we can't make any pretense of being in any way honest and objective about our reporting. That was a problem. Now that's before we get to the issue of her show itself. So what's happened in the past few years, typically, is that the White House Correspondents' Dinner comedian, the lead act, okay, because the rest of the dinner is kind of these idiots. Sometimes, President Obama used to go up there, himself an idiot, and make jokes and laugh at the press and whatever, and yuck it up with because, to be honest with you, they were basically jerking him off the rest of the time, most of them. So the main act was usually this comedian who would be the up-and-coming guy or gal who was going to end up getting some sort of major gig either on Comedy Central or on Netflix, whatever it might be. So in the case of the past few years, you've seen increasingly, I would say, a steady tilt towards the Daily Show type people. Okay, so there was, what's his name, Larry Wilmore, a former Daily Show alumnus. There was Hassan Minhaj, who was a writer for the Daily Show. Now he's getting his own Netflix show soon. Funny how Netflix hasn't learned their lesson, because he wasn't funny at his dinner either. Larry Wilmore, I would say, is kind of funny as a stand-up sometimes. Larry Wilmore had that famous incident where he called Obama the N-word, and people were, again, they were aghast. They're like, well, what the hell is happening here? I thought that we were supposed to be more cautious with our speech, and here's this guy coming up and just blurting it out because he happens to also be a black guy. So that was the case with the White House Correspondents' Dinner for most of the past few years. I don't know who did it in 2016, but in 2015 it was Wilmore. In 2017 it was Minhaj. This year it was Michelle Wolf, and she just crashed and burned both at the dinner and on TV and on Netflix. I'm sorry. It says Netflix, this is from Twitchy, which is, by the way, a biased right-wing source, but we'll get to a different one. Deadline is a little more of an objective one. So again, I name the sources as whether you can trust them to be objective or not. And this one, I'd say we can agree, is a little more of a biased right-wing source. There's certainly more of a right-wing source. Guess a bunch of gross, unfunny, tired, angry jokes combined with a dash of unoriginal, uninspired, third-wave feminism just didn't get the viewers Netflix thought they would. Who knew? And we hate to break it to Jimmy Kimmel writer Bess Cobb, but even if a man had tried to put this disaster of a show together, it would have tanked. Hashtag sorry, not sorry. But she had to try and play the sexist card. So Bess Cobb said, Michelle Wolf's cancellation goes to show if you're a talk show host with great jokes and perfect sketches, it's best if you're not a woman. So then somebody else said, so how do you explain, this is another woman, how do you explain all the other successful shows that are just as offensive and led by women? Do their voices not count? Apparently not. And then this person also might be a woman. No, it's a guy. Says Joel McHale was exactly that, and his was canceled too. So for those of you who don't, Joe McHale used to be on Community, which was a pretty good show back when I was watching network TV about a community college. I thought it was a very good show, in fact. That's just what I think. And he was a good actor, and he got a show on Netflix called The Joel McHale Show with Joe McHale. And it bombed as well, because Netflix is trying to take over this kind of late night market niche. They're trying to edge in they're trying to do the same thing that they do on ABC, NBC, CBS, and Fox, which is to have these late night shows, and also TBS, I believe. They want these late night shows that are they're all about entertainment, and they can get a little more money that way, I think, by promoting movies and certain things that are coming out. That's why they're doing some of this. And they hope that this way they'll be able to garner a little more money because that's basically a new way for them to advertise for things that need advertisement. You know, movies, new TV shows, maybe a new album or whatever by an artist. That is why late night TV has flourished in the past. It's not why it's succeeding now, because nowadays promoting some of these things is a little different. I mean, you remember Cloverleaf, which I think I saw Cloverleaf. I believe Cloverleaf actually succeeded. It had nothing to do with late night. It had to do more with kind of this mysterious trailer that was playing, and people were sharing it, and they're like, oh, what the fuck is this movie? It looks really nice. It's going to be scary or whatever. That's one of the best ways to promote a movie now. Have a very quirky trailer or something that you can have go viral. You don't need to have your lead actor or your bassist, if you're a band, go on the Jimmy Kimmel show and yuck it up with him all night. And Netflix kind of has gone the wrong way with the trend and embraced it. Then there's other people who say, Liz Steering says, to be honest, while a lot of her material was funny and witty, her voice was so shrill it made my brain hurt. And then this person says, and this is a licensed social worker, that's what LCSW says, have to disagree here. She was fantastic on The Daily Show. Her HBO show was great. This Netflix show was crap. I couldn't get through one episode. So is that not an honest take there? This person says, I like Michelle Wolf. I could not get through the first episode. I just didn't think it was funny. Then this person says, maybe this is inflammatory, but the format was limiting and wasn't a good spotlight for her talent. She didn't suck, but it sucked. She's worth better. Maybe if we all speak up and say so, she'll find it. She is worth better. I don't think so. So this was basically a show that will go down as one of the greatest own goals of entertainment this year. And it's not going to be the last one. I think this Hassan Minhaj show, which is going to be coming out later, it's also going to be a failure. The Joel McHale show was on for a little longer. It was on in February. And it appears as if, so they have another couple of shows. Jerry Seinfeld's Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee, which Netflix stole away from Crackle. And My Next Guest Needs No Introduction with late night icon David Letterman, neither of which I watch. You know, I'm a huge fan of Seinfeld's show, obviously Seinfeld. I watched one episode of Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee, and I was incredibly underwhelmed. It just didn't seem, I just thought, well, what's the big novelty here? And then David Letterman, I've never been a huge fan of, but I understand he's a great late night icon for many people. I personally have never been a fan of David Letterman. So then the new ones are going to be Patriot Act with Hassan Minhaj, and the Norm Macdonald has a show, which will be obviously with Norm Macdonald, and The Fix, a comedy panel show helmed by Jimmy Carr, Catherine Ryan, and D.L. Hughley. So two of these shows I think are going to be complete and utter failures, which are Patriot Act and The Fix. And I'll explain why. And by the way, we are going to delay the Latin America update, even though I think it is pretty important. But this is also important. The reason that those shows are going to, well, I'll get to that in a minute. So I did put this review up of The Break, and this is what I'm trying to say, that people were deceived for a long time over whether The Break was a success or not, because Rotten Tomatoes does fix its audience reviews. But you can't fix ratings. If people are not watching the show, it doesn't matter how many fake positive reviews you have. You still don't have people. You don't have eyeballs watching the screen. There was a 2-star review that they said something very interesting, and I'd like to know if it's true. If anybody out there watches, or you know they know something about Rotten Tomatoes, or they know something about their algorithm. This was a bit interesting. There were some funny ones, though. It says, this nasty woman is Carrot Top after trans surgery without the comedy. And a lot of the people who gave it 5-star reviews did not. And this is a person, I would say, probably reviewed it twice, gave it 2 5-star reviews, and didn't even watch the show. So You know, and let's go to the profile here. Well, I don't know why they do this. So you have a lot of 5-star reviews where people are, yeah, so I don't sound any more interesting back then than I do now, so we'll just keep going live. But the point still remains the same. You had this is Rotten Tomatoes, which used to be not too long ago, by the way. It used to be the go-to place for getting movie reviews, getting TV show reviews as well. I wonder if they have, I don't think that they have music. But I guess it would be pointless because they've already fucked up their whole everything that they used to do right with TV and movies. They're now doing completely wrong. Okay, so I'm sorry, but there's no way for them to make up for calling a show that nobody cared about, giving it 75% fresh from the critics. Okay, 75% fresh, and then an audience score of 64%. Well, who was watching this show? Who was watching this show? Let's see if we can get it by order. Let me see here. Audience reviews. View all. So there's no featured audience reviews. So this is towards the end of the show. And let me see if I can get it. Okay, why this show had to cancel, where seated. So people can't put the show, they can't put a decent review up. This person says, very unfunny, mostly cheap jabs and childish. Potty talk, I can't imagine anyone with an IQ in the double digits liking this humorless drivel. Then you have a bunch of people that just gave it 5-star reviews but no comment. Except for this person. Michelle Wolf is brilliant and funny. I'm very sad she won't be on tomorrow. Any word on season 2? Wants to see it. Well, if she didn't see it, then how do you know how funny she is? Half-star review. 5-star review. So everybody says, everybody keeps putting these reviews that are basically, they don't reveal anything. These are ones that, you know, all these 5-star reviews. Well, who the hell are these people? Okay, there's only one other review that this person put up, apparently. So I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. There were a few people that did like this show. But the fact is that there weren't enough people who wanted to watch the show for it to succeed. I've seen a lot of reviews autopsies, I would call them, of the show after it was canceled, especially Tim Pool's view. And one of the things that they revealed was that even for people similar to the White House Correspondents' Dinner, even people that are of a very socially liberal mindset found her show just cringe-worthy and not funny, and generally in such poor taste that they started to really reconsider why they believe, for example, in being pro. I mean, the most famous example is the people who were pro-choice. So Matt Christensen and Tim Pool, both of whom are pro-choice, were saying that her show, where she did the Salute to Abortion, which was, I believe it was in early July, made them reconsider whether the pro-choice argument was really valid, because she said it in such a vulgar way that abortion should be basically like on the dollar menu. She said things that were basically meant to denote that abortion is not just a necessary contingency for people, and most people, a lot of people will say, even people who are pro-choice, they will say that it's a necessary evil. I think the majority opinion in the pro-choice community is that it's a necessary contingency. So there's a difference. People who say that's a necessary contingency don't believe that there's anything to be ashamed of regarding it. People who think that it's a necessary evil are the ones who tend to have called it something that should be safe, legal, and rare. Nowadays, the rare part is being removed from it. And she's one of the type of people who say that it's actually a desirable thing. You might remember, I believe it was in either 2016 or 2017, that Lena Dunham, shitting on the toilet while eating cake fame. She said that she wished she had had an abortion. So that was a turning point for a number of people who said that this woman had basically lost her mind. Okay, so that's the type of thing that has driven people away from actual establishment liberalism, because it's really departed from the values of the liberalism of the 70s, 80s, and 90s, where yes, they were in favor of keeping Roe versus Wade and having a Supreme Court that would be able to, that would guarantee the right of a woman to have an abortion, but they wouldn't specifically, they wouldn't go too far, and there were certain moderate positions that I think a lot of Americans could get behind, whether they were a hardcore Democrat or they were sort of these middle of the road Democrats. There were a lot of middle of the road Democrats that were saying, yes, we'll allow abortion clinics to operate in the United States. However, we are going to encourage people to be responsible such that they won't have to have an abortion. That's not what Michelle Wolf stands for. Michelle Wolf's values are that abortion is a desirable outcome. Abortion is something that people should celebrate. That's one of the reasons that people had a problem with her. Rotten Tomatoes reviews suck. Yes, they do. It's almost unusable now. I liked Wolf when slamming the establishment, but the abortion comedy is on par with pedo jokes. I'm on par. My spell check does not. Okay. That's good. So yeah, I think, again, I personally am pro-life. I think that there is a pro-choice argument to make. I'm not one of these Bible thumpers. I think, for example, that abortion should not be completely made against the law, but I think it should be encouraged that people avoid getting into a situation where they have an unwanted pregnancy that they end up having to abort. And I believe that's a sensible position. Okay, some people now say that my position is basically hate speech. In any case, let me tell you why this is an important development. So, like I said, the Hassan Minhaj show, Patriot Act, is basically going to be a complete disaster. They're going to bring back Norm Macdonald. Now, again, this is my personal opinion. Norm Macdonald is one of my top 2 or 3 favorite comedians of all time. Okay, it happens to be because he had a couple sitcoms back in the 90s that I thought were amazing. It's just me. They weren't particularly successful themselves. Every movie I've seen with him in, I think, has been great. But that would put me in the cult category, the type of people who aren't in the mainstream, because his shows and his films just weren't that successful. Okay, so I'm not going to say that Norm Macdonald is going to be a roaring success. But I would say that the fact that Netflix is willing to bring him back after almost 20 years of him almost being in the comedy wilderness, I think is a show, it's a display that Norm Macdonald's type of comedy, which is really this sort of, shopping cart to the shins, unabashed, provocative crap, making people feel uncomfortable by directly confronting them and giving them, basically, if you watch, for example, Owen Benjamin breaks down his comedy very, very nicely. He'll set up, Norm Macdonald will set up a joke by saying something very, very out there, like making fun of the fact that like his Michael Jackson bits are the best, where he will say, for example, that Michael Jackson has adopted a girl or something, and that people should not worry about it because Michael Jackson is a homosexual pedophile. And that was his joke. Right, Shishko, we're talking about Michelle Wolf. Hey, Arjun, stay tuned. There's going to be another stream soon. In any case, if you watch the Norm Macdonald's comedy, it's not comedy that's meant to please people and be obeying some sort of protocol. And that's something I think that maybe the world is ready for again. I'm not sure it's going to be successful. I personally hope it is. I like Norm Macdonald a lot, and I've followed his career since I was a kid. Shiska, if you don't know who that is, you should check it out. Check out Norm Macdonald. There's actually a channel called I'm Not Norm that has all of his crap on it. And I personally find it hilarious. I can watch those jokes again and again and again. So in any case, this is going to be, I think, a turning point. And remember, we're heading into an election season. Now, I don't want to say the election season will affect everything, but I want you guys to know something, and I hope I'm not being too ahead of myself. I'm not getting ahead of myself too much in saying this. But if the GOP hangs on to both houses of Congress this autumn in the November elections, I predict that there will be a massive shift in the way that entertainment is going in the United States. Arjun says, I love Norm. I loved his O.J. Simpson joke that got him fired. Yeah, I think most people did. You know, I think Norm Macdonald, part of the reason he hasn't been more successful is that he pisses the powerful off. He doesn't piss the public off as much as he pisses the powerful off. So in any case, once that election goes through, and if the Democrats have failed to recover either house of Congress, and they're almost assured to not get the Senate, it will be considered a massive disaster for a lot of these Hollywood studios, as well as these, what do you call them? These streaming services, Netflix, Hulu, and Amazon. You're gonna see a lot of the, you know, Comedy Central has a number of shows that are just a waste of space. For example, the Jim Jeffries show. Nobody likes that show. In fact, let's see if we can bring it up. Let's see if let's see what the reviews are from Rotten Tomatoes on this. Because if they think this is a good show, I don't know what to say. 100%. Yeah, I don't know anybody who watches the show, so what am I supposed to say? Maybe Jim Jeffries went on and reviewed it. Average audience score 100%. Tomatometer. So none of the critics have actually. I don't know why it's not working. So essentially, this show is not exactly a roaring success. I think the opposition with Jordan Klepper, let me see that one. It might have already been canceled. In fact, just nobody actually cared because it never was. This was supposedly the parody show of Alex Jones and InfoWars. Oops, I don't know if I can mention him, but the parody show certainly can make fun of him. So this one had 71% and 83, but people don't watch this show. So if that election happens and the Democrats don't get anything, what is going to be the reason for these shows to continue to be made? Because the objective had been to change hearts and minds. The objective had been, it's called the opposition, right? So the opposition to what? The opposition to the current administration. Jim Jeffries' show is almost exactly the same thing. Then you have Samantha Bee, also roundly hated. Then you have also, what's the other show? There's the original Daily Show with Trevor Noah. Much slower ratings than the show was with Jon Stewart in the past, partly because there's so many competitors with exactly the same format. Then you have Last Week Tonight with John Oliver. Then you have Chelsea Handler's show, I think, was canceled from Netflix too. There's so many of these shows you can't even keep up with them. And then on late night too, there's Seth Meyers, there's Stephen Colbert, there's Jimmy Kimmel, there's also what's the other guy, Jimmy Fallon. These shows are just not particularly successful because there's just too many of them. I'll say one last thing, and then we're going to wrap up this particular stream. There's another one coming up. I have my coffee here anyway. The whole idea of the variety comics, the diversity comics, it made sense. It kind of came to the fore in the early 2000s with the original Kings of Comedy. The original Kings of Comedy was a 4-man tour including Cedric the Entertainer. So they were all black guys. There was Cedric the Entertainer, Bernie Mac, D.L. Hughley, who at the time was the more famous of the four, and Steve Harvey. No, Steve Harvey was the most famous, and then it would be D.L. Hughley, Cedric the Entertainer, and Bernie Mac. That was a show that proved that you could have an entire group, a subgenre of comedy that could tour together and sell out massive venues. So then they had a similar one for Mexicans. I don't remember what it was called. That included George Lopez and Carlos Mencia. And I don't remember. Gabriel Iglesias might have been in it. He might have been too young at the time. I don't remember who it was. Then there was the blue collar comedy tour, and then there was the queer comedy tour, and then there was like the Asian whatever the Asian comedy tour was. So these were tremendous successes at the time because there was a huge, and this was in the early 2000s. There was a huge opening for different new voices in comedy. You know, an old generation was kind of dying. Well, what are you going to say? Richard Pryor, I think, had died at the time. You had George Carlin was getting really old. I think he died I don't remember what year he died. Who else was? Bill Hicks was already long dead. Chris Farley was long dead. A lot of the traditional successful white comedians, they were already kind of falling by the wayside. Their careers were over. Of course, there were some exceptions that would flare up. Dane Cook, for example, a young guy that they would come and go, and for a while they would be successful, and then they would leave. Why was the diverse comedy tour successful? Because people wanted to hear new takes on comedy from around the world from different perspectives. And it was a good thing. Original Kings of Comedy was a great show. A lot of people, first of all, there were a lot of black fans that thought that this was a great show that you could come to with your wife or kids or husband, I guess. And you could hear basically the type of comedy that you want to, it resonates with you. And then white audiences also found a lot of these comedians very interesting, such as Bernie Mac. I thought was an amazing comedian who was on Original Kings of Comedy. The same thing with Blue Collar Comedy Tour. Jeff Foxworthy was already a massive name in comedy. Suddenly you had Larry the Cable Guy, Ron White, and then there was another guy who I think was Bill Engvall might have been it. And that was very relatable for rural people. And then, of course, there was the gay comedy thing. And then there was the Asian comedy thing. And then Carlos Mencia, there was a huge scandal around whether he's stealing jokes or not. And that was a great idea. Now, when you combine that with The Daily Show, what was The Daily Show basically? It was a longer version of SNL's Weekend Update. Okay, so this is where I'm bringing the arc back to what we're talking about today. The Weekend Update has for years been SNL's news and current events segment on the show. It's usually in the middle of the show. And at one point, who was the anchor of Weekend Update? You've had past comics like Dennis Miller, Kevin Nealon, Colin Quinn, and Norm Macdonald. So Norm Macdonald was, in a certain sense, The Daily Show. Before there was The Daily Show, he was one of the people. He wasn't the only guy. I think Al Franken might have been one too. I'm not quite sure. Maybe not. But in either case, so they created The Daily Show. And The Daily Show, what was the big novelty of The Daily Show, which was originally with Craig Kilburn, and then it was with Jon Stewart. It was parodying the straight, like stuffed shirt, suit and tie news anchor, and it was making fun of the news that way. Because let's be honest, back then, and still to this day, most anchors behave that way, even if they're not white or male. One of the few non-white male anchors at the time was Connie Chung, who was a great anchor, but she's generally forgotten today. This Asian woman, also she did the show fantastic, but it wasn't as if she deviated too far from the standard that was set by some of the other anchors. So it worked because it reflected the way the news is read. You had somebody like Jon Stewart giving and he did it. I'm not a huge fan of Jon Stewart, but he did the job very well. Then the same goes for a lot of those Weekend Update people. Remember, Norm Macdonald also one of his big gimmicks on Saturday Night Live was basically making fun of Larry King. And then there was another guy, I think, who was making fun of Andy Rooney, if any of you remember him. I remember him, and that kind of makes me feel old, even though, I mean, I was kind of, even at the age of 8, I was staying up and watching TV. So there's your explanation. In any case, so we're wrapping up here. I know this is going long. So once they started branching out the Daily Show to all of these different, you know, sub Daily shows, you had Larry Wilmore with the Nightly Show. Then you had Trevor Noah replacing Jon Stewart, which was not a success. Then you had John Oliver. John Oliver sort of made it work, although, you know, the whole thing where he freaks out at certain stories is a departure from, you know, the anchorman being the anchorman cannot be somebody who's too emotional. So with John Oliver, you're already getting a bit of a failure there. With Larry Wilmore, you're getting a colossal failure. With Samantha Bee, you're getting basically a Chernobyl level failure of the format, because it's just her standing in front of a screen, just basically emoting about the news stories. And it's the same thing with Michelle Wolf. So instead of actually doing what those shows originally were meant to do, which is to parody the news stories, you're just getting this cartoonish nonsense that nobody actually thinks is that funny. It's almost like a parody of the Daily Show itself. It's not a parody of the news anymore. And that's why a lot of these shows are simply going to go away, because they're really, the news itself is now a parody of the news. So why do you even need anybody like Samantha Bee, who you might not even agree with? Why do you need somebody like Trevor Noah to do it? Because you can do it yourself. We do it ourselves all the time. There's plenty of shows that do it all the time. Louder with Crowder, does it not do that? And they don't even try to be like the Daily Show. So please let me know what you think. Like the video, subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed already. Those of you that have subscribed already, they are removing subscriptions of mine, I believe. I've seen like 2 or 3 the past few days. So, you know, if it's important for you to keep watching the channel, just make sure you're subscribed. Also, comment on the video after it uploads and share it.